election year, presidential candidates often seek endorsements from mayors of major cities to help buoy their campaigns. Yesterday, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot told the Chicago Sun-Times she would probably not endorse any of the three frontrunners, not Biden, Sanders, or Warren.
In town for the U.S. Conference of Mayors' 88th winter meeting is Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot to tell us why and also talk to us more about the city. Great to see you, Mayor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
I do want to talk about the endorsement issue. We wanted to start with some breaking news, which is that a Chicago woman is confirmed to have the coronavirus. Just talk about what the city's response will be and where the public can get more information.
Well, since this virus kind of rose to prominence about a week to 10 days ago, our Chicago Department of Public Health has been working hand in glove both with the CDC and also the State Department of Public Health, monitoring what's happening with the different advisories that were coming out of CDC. Our airports are now one of the screening airports for this virus, and we got notification that a woman from the city of Chicago was demonstrating symptoms. The CDC's been directly involved and made the declaration this morning. So what we are doing is continuing the screenings at the airports, making sure that we're sending out information to folks to distinguish the coronavirus from other common colds and flus, and we'll continue to monitor the situation
Mayor,
going forward.
Can you tell us anything else about the some of the symptoms? Is this a person who traveled recently to Wuhan, China? I know that was the case for the Texas A&M University case, and that's what we saw there. Are we seeing a similar fact pattern here?
We do believe that she had some contact with mainland China, but the information is still evolving in part because she is quite ill and in the hospital. So we'll know more about that, and as soon as we know more, we'll release it to the public.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Mayor, we did want to talk to you a little bit about your comments regarding a presidential endorsement, a potential presidential endorsement. First of all, you want to break any news here with us? You ready to announce who you're going with?
And let me just clarify things. Well, the question was, who have I spoken to, who's talked to me? So I identified the folks that I talked to and the folks that I hadn't heard from. And what I said, and it is true, is obviously I'm not going to make any endorsement from somebody who doesn't ask and doesn't have a one-on-one conversation with me. So I just want to make sure that we put that in context. Look, I think Chicago is very important, in part because we're the heart of the Midwest. The Democratic Party was born of working class folks, low-income folks who are struggling and continue to struggle today. And I want to make sure that whoever the nominee is speaking the values of the people not only in my city, but the entire Midwest. If you don't energize those folks who are the core constituents of the Democratic Party, you don't have a shot of winning.
And so you've ruled out these endorsements, Sanders, Warren, or Biden. I understand that in the context of your comments. I know that you participated at one time in a Bloomberg initiative alongside Mayor London Breed of San Francisco, who has decided to throw her weight behind Michael Bloomberg. How have you considered that? Are you considering an endorsement of the mayor? I mean, and now that since you have participated in some of his programs and have had some contact with him in the past?
I am considering it because obviously he's a candidate. I think he's a viable candidate. There's a lot of things that I know from his experience, both as a mayor but also as a philanthropist, the number of things that he supports, particularly making sure that young kids of color get all the opportunities in front of them so that they can really live out their God-given potential. I think that that's important, something that I know big city mayors like me are very much focused on, is expanding accessibility and inclusion to people of all backgrounds, regardless of zip code or neighborhood, as you will. But I'm not prepared to make a decision yet. I'm following the race very closely. As you can see, it's incredibly fluid. Think about just in 2 months' time, the polls that we've seen in Iowa. Who's up, who's down, who's up again, who's peaking, who's... So I think there's a good possibility that out of the first 4 elections, we could have 4 different winners. So I think we're far from knowing who the nominee is going to be. But as I said, I want to make sure that it's somebody who, number one, can beat Trump, and number 2, is really speaking the values of people in the heartland.
Do you worry about, because we've got 2 billionaires in the race now who've spent more money than all the other candidates combined, who are, some of whom are raising from grassroots followings, $18, $20, $10 at a time. Are you worried about the prospect of billionaires basically buying their way into this process?
Well, I'm not worried about that, but I think as a party, we've got to come to reckon with, I think, a couple of different concepts. One, campaign finance has got to be something that we push back to the top of the priority list. But what I also worry about is a process that excludes people who aren't wealthy. So I'm not so much worried about the billionaires spending their own money. And, God bless Mike Bloomberg, who says, no matter who the nominee is, I'm building an infrastructure that we're going to turn over. I think that's going to inure to the benefit of the party. But when we don't have voices like and particularly diverse voices, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Joaquin Castro. Yeah, we've got to make sure that we have a path for other people who don't come from money, but who are really great leaders, who are pushing us and pricking our consciousness on important policy issues. They've got to be able to have a seat at the table as well.
One thing I'd like to ask you about is President Obama. He, of course, came from the city of Chicago. He was a community organizer there. Came to Washington very much on the promises of fighting for working class and fulfilling much of the activist promise. And that didn't necessarily pan out. We saw one of the things that came out of the New York Times editorial endorsement was presidential candidate Andrew Yang. He said that his heart was broken by President Obama. As mayor of the city of Chicago, obviously Chicago has had its problems under the Obama administration and since. How do you think about President Obama's legacy as coming from your hometown and how you're trying to either build on it, change the direction of the party? Because that's how we see much of the fight right now.
Well, look, I think we're blessed to have President Obama, and he's always going to be a son of Chicago, no matter where they live. And I think that there's lots of important parts of his legacy. He was an outsider. He wasn't part of a political organization, and he raised people's expectations for what a leader can be, but also what the power of government can be. Now, obviously, he faced a lot of headwinds, particularly when the House went into Republican hands, and you've got a Republican Party that was quite upfront about the fact that their mission in life was to deny him a second term, and then having failed that, to throw up every roadblock that they could conceive of in his path. And we know some of the carnage, frankly, that was wrought by having a Congress that wasn't in control of the Democrats. But I think about Barack Obama as somebody who, in its purest essence, understood the power of participatory democracy and was really challenging lots of different folks, not to stay on the sidelines, but to get engaged, and he continues to do that. Yeah. Voting matters. And folks that stayed home in 2016 that said, oh, there was no real difference between the two candidates. Well, we've learned a lesson in the fallacy of that argument, and we're paying for it every single day now. So I think our focus has to be, and President Obama is really leading the way, making sure that we re-engage those people who are excited about the possibilities of government and a new day for our country, the new day for our cities and our states. And it's incumbent upon us as mayors and local leaders to make sure that we are igniting that enthusiasm and really making the case for people of why they need to come out and vote in November.
Yeah.
Mayor, one of the big challenges in Chicago, as it is in the country at large, is inequality. You have some people doing enormously well and some people who are really, really struggling. How much can you do in the context of one city versus what is needed in terms of larger, more structural changes to address that inequality?
I think we can do a lot. I mean, mayors touch more individuals' lives on a daily basis than any other elected official in the country. And in Chicago, we are putting a particular emphasis on equity and inclusion. And later this, in February, we're going to be hosting our first ever poverty summit. We're doing a lot of things around equity and inclusion. We're doing a lot of things around economic development. But we know in our city that we've got neighborhoods and families who are trapped in intergenerational poverty. And if we don't address that and tackle it head on with the tools that we have at our disposal, we're going to continue to lose those people and pass them by. And poverty is not cost-free. We're paying for it every day. When life expectancy differences between an impoverished neighborhood and a more fortunate neighborhood are 10 years, 15 years, 20 years,
wow.
When we see that showing up in emergency rooms, lack of access to health care, and of course in public safety and violence, we know that we have to do a better job, and we have the tools at our disposal in cities to make that happen. Now, of course, we would love more help from the federal government. I'm never going to say that we're getting enough, because we're not. But we have to play the cards that we're dealt, and we can't just say, woe is me, the federal government is helping us. We have an obligation every day as mayors to deliver for our residents, no matter what their economic status is, and particularly those who really need our help the most. Our most vulnerable, at-risk communities demand our full attention and focus.
Last question for you, Mayor. I think this probably annoys you because it annoys me as well, which is that Chicago is often used as a political football between Democrats and Republicans, either as an example of crime run amok, gun control, whatever social agenda people are trying to push here in Washington. You have successfully dropped the murder rate 3 years in a row. Can you talk about why that is? What are some of the policing tactics? And I mean, it's still, I think, 500 murders in 2019. What are some of the structural barriers that you face in
Under
dropping
five.
rate?
Under five.
Okay.
Look, the reality is what we've changed from is a law enforcement first and only strategy. What we're seeing is in this epidemic of violence is a public health crisis, and we're treating it as such. And what that means is looking at the root causes, making sure that we are bringing additional city resources to the table to think about public safety in a much more holistic way. So our schools, our parks, our libraries, our infrastructure departments, we are making sure that we have an all-hands-on-deck approach to public safety. Obviously, law enforcement has a critical role to play, but they're never going to be as successful as all of us working together to really flood the zone in those neighborhoods that are most at risk and making sure that we're doing everything we can to support those individuals and families. When we bring resources into those neighborhoods, we know what we can do, which is change the trajectory of those neighborhoods, of those families, and really give them the support to be vibrant, healthy places.
Sagar said, last question. I got one more for you.
Sure.
I followed the teachers movement closely across the country and also in the city of Chicago, and part of your election was a very pro-teacher platform. What do you say to those union leaders who say that if you had kept your campaign promises, then a strike wouldn't have occurred?
Well, that's all rhetoric and fallacy. What I do say is to the teachers. We wanted to make sure that we honored our teachers because they're so critically important in the lives of our young people. Also, our support staff. We gave them the most historic contract in the Chicago Teachers Union history. At the end of this 5 years, the average teacher is going to be making almost $100,000. That's real money. We've lifted up the support personnel who for so long were literally lurching from paycheck to paycheck. We've given them a path towards real economic stability and support. So I think we've got a very good contract in place on the economics, but also on the social equity components as well. As I said, equity and inclusion are my North Stars. I want to make sure that our young children have access to the kind of opportunities that made a difference in my life, are making the difference in the life of my daughter. And that's what we've done, both through the contract, but also other supports that we're putting in place for young people in Chicago.
Mayor, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you just after this.